Some took cash, some stole drugs, and one put thousands of pounds of heroin onto the streets. And they were the police.
He reached across, took the bundle with £1,000 and stuffed it into his pocket.
And he picked up 2 of these bars of cannabis resin and he put them in a drawer of the desk.
He's a thief and he shouldn't be in the job. End of story.
Tonight on Panorama, we reveal what happened when a police force set out to catch its crooked cops. Birmingham. It's Britain's second city with a crime rate to match. But the police force here has a history of corruption and malpractice. This is the story of how some police officers tried to fight back, to take a stand against criminal colleagues. Many of the policemen who've spoken out against corruption must remain in the shadows. They still work undercover, sometimes in danger, and for that reason we've agreed to conceal their faces. Others don't want to appear for fear of further antagonising those officers they still work alongside. For they've all broken the big taboo. They put themselves on the line to catch the crooked cops. This is what happened. The story begins 5 years ago on an overspill housing estate, Woodgate Valley, on the outskirts of Birmingham. It's 8 o'clock on an October morning. A house here has been targeted by the West Midlands drug squad. The owner is the local dope dealer. He's been selling small amounts of cannabis, and his business is about to be terminated. The police burst in and started searching. A look around the lot soon produced 2 9-ounce bars of cannabis. Case made against the dealer, and no argument from him.
Being caught is inevitable at the end. It's just now meant to stop. I didn't stop and I caught me.
It seemed an open and shut case, but what happened next is still shaking the West Midlands force. One of the policemen on the raid was Detective Constable Paul Blackford. With Detective Constable Dick Houston, he went to search upstairs. This is Constable Blackford's testimony.
I pulled back the carpet. I was kneeling down and DC Houston was standing immediately behind me. I saw a bundle of banknotes which had been covered by the carpet. I picked them up and handed them immediately to DC Houston. He didn't count the money out loud, but said to me that there was £500 there. I'm quite clear in my mind he said £500.
DC Blackford and his sergeant John Beard both recorded in their notebooks that £500 had been found.
One day the following week, I was in the drug squad office and DC Houston was at his desk. I made some comment about the job at Woodgate Valley, saying I'd done my pocketbook and could provide a statement over the recovery of £500. DC Houston's reaction took me completely by surprise. He said, in hushed tones, no, it was £400.
The honesty of Detective Constable Dick Houston was now in doubt. What made matters worse was Houston's excuse.
I disagreed and said it was £500. He replied, no, it's 400, 100 to Basher's Sarbot.
Basher was Alan Breakwell, another drug squad detective. Sarbot was squad slang for informant. Houston was saying the missing £100 had illegally gone to Breakwell's contact, the man whose tip-off had led to the raid. So now Blackford had doubts over 2 of his colleagues, Houston and Breakwell. He feared there was something rotten in the drug squad. Within a week, their worries had multiplied. It was another apparently routine raid, this time in Birmingham's Handsworth district. The raid was led by Detective Inspector Pat Sullivan. Also involved was DC Breakwell. A haul of cannabis was found in a dustbin. Blackford recalls counting 16 bags of it, which he then put back, taping down the lid.
Sometime later we went out. I saw the dustbin by the back door and the sellotape had been removed. At the same time I saw D.I. Sullivan and DC Breakwell in the garden. DC Breakwell clearly had something secreted under his coat. DS Beard said, "What's going on here?" D.I. Sullivan replied, words to the effect of, "That's for Brownie just in case." At that time, we as a drug squad were looking at the activities of a man called Brown, a known drug dealer. I took the comment to mean that drugs had been taken to set up Brown.
Blackford knew he'd carefully counted out 16 bags of dope. His worst fears were confirmed when, back at a police station briefing later, they heard Inspector Sullivan announce that just 15 bags had been recovered. For Paul Blackford, the discrepancy clinched it. He was convinced his boss, Detective Inspector Pat Sullivan, was corrupt.
Together with D.S. Beard, I confronted D.I. Sullivan. I walked into his office and said to his face, "As far as I'm concerned, you're bent. It's not on, and I'm not standing for it." He didn't reply. He just sat looking at me. Over the next few days, D.S. Beard and I discussed in detail what could be done. I didn't want to be disloyal to the drug squad and the police force, but I was not prepared to be a party to such activities.
They had a dilemma. They believed 3 colleagues were corrupt, but how to prove it? Houston was the key. He'd taken the £100, Blackford and Beard took him for a drive.
I decided to confront DC Houston, so a few days later I arranged for him to come out in our car with myself and DS Beard. I tape recorded the conversation.
You know that's £500 that I've been in my pocket? Yeah. With the £100 issue. Which you said was for Bashir Sargent. Yeah.
They had Houston's admission on tape. It may have been a question of just £100, but it was about to land the West Midlands police with another corruption scandal. In the last 10 years, the West Midlands force has faced various inquiries into malpractice. The most memorable was when the then Chief Constable closed down the Serious Crime Squad. A number of detectives had been fabricating evidence and torturing suspects.
My determination to see a thorough inquiry into these matters is unswerving and quite ruthless.
But that inquiry was undermined from the start. Before the crime squad's office had been searched, vital documents went missing. 3 years later came the report.
It concluded that quite a number of them had committed criminal offences, and nothing happened. So far as I know, a few officers no doubt left the force in disgrace, a few more who should have left in disgrace left with enhanced pensions. 1 or 2 received advice, I believe, is the phrase.
But no criminal charges.
But no criminal charges.
Chris Mullin has tracked the West Midlands Police since campaigning for the release of the Birmingham Six, the men wrongly convicted of pub bombings in the 1970s. But again, no police officer was ever convicted of criminal offences. With all the previous inquiries into police corruption and malpractice running into the sand, it looked as though suspect police in the West Midlands would always get away with it.
It was against this background that the new allegations about some members of the drug squad reached the Chief Constable. So yet another investigation into the force was inevitable. This time it was imperative nothing should go wrong. And there was one crucial advantage. Important evidence against the detectives was to come not from convicted individuals, but from fellow police officers. Even so, the inquiry was never going to be easy.
Remember, these officers, corrupt officers involved, are very astute. We've trained them very highly in catching criminals. It's not surprising that they can use those skills to avoid capture themselves.
The new inquiry was codenamed Operation Gunter and based at a police station in West Bromwich. The man put in charge was one of the West Midlands' most experienced officers. He was barely prepared for what was to come.
I'd been a detective officer for a number of years, a police officer for 25 years. I'd never experienced these kind of allegations, although I'd got experience of complaints against the police and various things like that. I'd never encountered anything quite like this before.
Operation Gunter's first target was Detective Constable Dick Houston. He joined the West Midlands force in 1979. The inquiry called in the 2 officers who'd first complained, DC Blackford and Sergeant Beard. They gave statements that the sum recovered at Woodgate Valley was